ran upstairs to tell my brother that it was happening now and that this was it, and they were gonna kill us.
When I walked in the room, I was panicking, and I just fired every shot I had. I just fired until there was nothing left.
My brother got there first, and we just burst through the doors, and I started firing.
I was just firing as I went into the room. I just started firing.
In what direction?
In front of me.
What was in front of you?
My parents.
Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Cuomo. Tonight, how it really happened. Murder in Beverly Hills, the aftermath. In 1989, the Menendez brothers were living the American dream. Lyle, age 20, Eric, just 18 years old. But then came August 20th. These wealthy Beverly Hills boys picked up a pair of shotguns and gunned down their parents, Kitty and Jose Menendez. After 2 trials each, Lyle and Eric were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. But here we are 20 years later, and still one question remains. Why? Tonight, after nearly 2 decades, the older brother, Lyle Menendez, is going to speak. What happened that night? Why did they feel they needed to kill their parents? And the surprising reason why Lyle thinks his second trial was unjust. Joining me now on the phone from Mule Creek State Prison in California, Lyle Menendez. Mr. Menendez, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Chris.
So it has been over 20 years, and you have not done interviews about what happened that night, why it happened, what you saw as a miscarriage of justice. Why speak now?
I think this, seeing so much coverage on TV that is really just focused on a very narrow narrative of killing your parents for money, and my family telling me that it's not really breaking through the media coverage at all. What was presented at trial and what really happened with your life, and you should say something. And they've been kind of saying that for a long time. And I don't know, we just decided to try to break through a little bit of the coverage and maybe get people to see a little bit more of what was really presented. And I just felt like maybe some of it had to come from me.
When you think about the biggest misconception that's out there about you, your brother, the case, what really happened, what do you think that is?
Well, I think that this was something that happened in Beverly Hills, and I get that the media picked up on it right away. When you just think of 2 rich kids and they killed their parents, and they're in Beverly Hills and they spent a lot of money and they had a lot of money, it seems like a very simple case. And then you have this long trial in which you have 2 separate juries, and sometimes I think that's lost, that there were 2 separate juries that viewed this case, and 18 of the 24 jurors determined that it was not a planned killing, and over half of the 2 juries determined that it was not a murder. So I just hope that a viewer would ask themselves, like, how could that be? How could you have 18 of 24 people think this is not planned, or half the jury think this is not murder? And what was this really, the motive of what happened, and why did it happen? There was a lot of talk about a spending spree, and these things play well on TV. But if they looked at the circumstances of my life at that time, that made no sense. It made no sense that I would kill my parents for money, or that anyone would kill their parents for money in the circumstances we were in.
Well, let's do it this way then. It all comes down to one night in your life and how that was presented by the prosecution and what you believe the truth of it was that either was or was not allowed to come out. So take us through it. Take us back to that night and what happened, in your opinion.
Well, I think I could take you just maybe a little bit briefly, a little farther back. I think it's important to know what was happening in my life at that time, because the first thing that needed to be discussed was there a financial issue in this family that caused this? I don't think that was really an issue for the jury by the time they got midway through the trial at all. But in the public, I think it just remains there. To me, the idea that I would just suddenly just kill my parents for money made no sense, and that really had nothing to do with this whatsoever. What happened that weekend is my father was in a sexual relationship with my brother, unbeknownst to me. I had been molested as a child. I knew this about him. There was a sense in this family that my brother may have been molested when he was young also. My mother knew about it. She was informed early on, as far back as the early 70s. But I didn't think that anything had continued.
Part of the question in that early trial was, why didn't people know? Why weren't there marks? This was an older kid. This kid was 18 years old at the time. You know, why hadn't he told anybody? How do you answer those questions?
I would say that I think experts and the investigators that looked at this case from the defense side were actually expecting to find probably very little evidence of this, but there was actually quite a bit of evidence in this case. Luck or not, just it was there. An adult cousin of mine had been told by me when I was under 10 about what was happening with my father.
He and his dad had been touching each other, and he indicated that it was in his genital area.
She did go directly to my mother, and my mother did intervene.
When you say intervene, Lyle, just so people understand, what does that mean? What did your mother do at that time when you were a kid?
She went to my mother and had her come downstairs and told her what I had just told her about what was happening with my father. And my mother dragged me upstairs. Now, my mother, I don't know that my mother intervened, but the fact that it stopped after that, I like to believe that she intervened. I think my adult cousin certainly felt that. And it's kind of a shock that she even was willing to confront my mother, considering who my father was. I mean, you have to understand, it's difficult to get across who my father was. This was a very brutal man. And people knew some of it, but the outside world really wouldn't have seen a lot of it. And so people like this testified in my trial. So by the time I took the stand in the jury, the jury understood that I was dealing with a dangerous and brutal father.
All right, let's hold it right there. We need to take a commercial break. Stay tuned. We have more with Lyle Menendez. What do you remember being told by your mother, by your father, their actions that made you feel that your life may be in danger? Welcome back to a special How It Really Happened, Murder in Beverly Hills, The Aftermath. On the phone now from prison in California is Lyle Menendez. Now, Lyle, take us up to that night in 1989 and what you believed your existence was about during that weekend. Where were you emotionally? Where were you in terms of your relationship with your parents and your brother at that time?
I certainly did not know that my father was still in a sexual relationship with my brother. When he told me that weekend, I think in part because he was concerned that I was about to go back to school and, continue my life and sort of leave him behind. My brother was suicidal, was emotional, and revealed this horrific, history of what had been going on with his father. I had the reaction that I still today, how complicit was he in it? I mean, he's an 18-year-old kid. Obviously, this isn't something where you're being forced. But I don't know. That's just complicated. Whether how emotionally beaten down he was at that point. But they were obviously in a sexual relationship that he wanted to stop.
That winds up being a big question for the jury, right? It's one thing to hear about something that happened to an 8-year-old. It's another thing to say that it happened to an 18-year-old, that it was still going on, and it's such a point of urgency that you needed to kill the person who was doing it.
Yes, and I certainly did not kill my father because he was doing that. My intention was to take my brother back to Princeton, find some way out of this, figure out what we should do. My brother thinks it's, the fatal error in all of this that I decided to tell my father, threaten him basically and say that this is going to stop and I'm going to take my brother out of this. I expected his reaction to be, okay, I'm done with it, go ahead. And he did not have that reaction. His reaction was, you should go back to Princeton, deal with your life, you've got your things set up, and and let Eric be. He's going to stay here in California.
And how did you understand that? Because you said maybe your brother was complicit in it, you weren't sure. Where was your head in terms of what you thought was going on with your brother and your father?
I felt like my brother had given up. It started when he was an early teenager or younger, and he had just sort of given up and ended up in this sort of sick sexual relationship with my father. And I didn't really know I didn't really know what to think other than just horrified by it and just shocked that I did not know. And I think my shock really grew when I had conversations with my mother about it, and it was clear that she knew. She may have had the same reaction that I did. She may have felt that, well, it's not against his will anymore at this point. But for me, it was just trying to end it and then being threatened that my father was never going to let that happen.
Threatened how?
More concerned that I was going to reveal what had happened with my father. Because you have to understand, my father was a very successful media executive, very high-profile media executive. There was no way he was going to go through a child molestation trial. And I was feeling a tremendous amount of outrage. I mean, the fact that my mother knew, I can't even really explain the downward spiral I was in that week. I mean, my whole life that I was about to go start again at Princeton, and that, I was the last thing I was even thinking about. I was just really in this sort of consumed place of so many emotions. I can say anger and hatred and outrage and fear and those things, because it's hard to separate them. I just was overwhelmed. I didn't know what was going to happen. I felt like it was a very, grave situation.
When you say they were threatening you and the comments, those matter. What do you remember being told by your mother, by your father, their actions that made you feel that your life may be in danger?
Well, my father was telling me that a couple days before that I had made my decision in terms of siding with Eric and wanting to threaten to expose him, and he was now forced to make his own decisions about what to do about that. And I asked him if that's a threat, and he said, "You take it for what it is." And I know my father. I know what that means. He's basically suggesting that he isn't going to go through a child molestation trial. He would rather go through a murder trial than a child molestation trial. And I have no doubt that that's what he would prefer. I felt we were in grave danger. I should have left at that point. I clearly should have gotten out at that point. My brother was not willing to go. I think he just emotionally didn't care. I think he was.
That's the obvious question,
already.
right? If you think that somebody might do something to you, you're 21 years old, he's 18, you could just leave.
You could, but I wasn't able to help my brother for the previous 12 years of this. I mean, was I going to abandon him then and just go back to my cushy life in New Jersey and a new condo and start? I just met a new girlfriend that summer, and was I going to do that? If I could go back, I wish I would have done it, frankly. But I didn't. I can only live with what I did, and I didn't. And I stayed in the house. I waited to see what would happen. I hoped that there would be more conversations to resolve it. My mother made comments that later that evening that we had ruined this family, and if I hadn't gone to Dad, we might have got past this. And we took a number of the comments to mean that this is going to be it. That was going to be the day.
Before your brother said anything to you, what did you think was going to be the result of that night?
That I was going to die.
No. What did you think was going to be the condition of your brother?
Oh, I thought he was going to die too.
And die at whose hands?
My parents.
So we, reacted to that in a way that we shouldn't have. Again, there was so much emotion flooding through me at that point that I have basically cast my life overboard, because there's no plan for this. I mean, there's no alibi. There's no way to get away with it. There's no thinking about that. I should have been arrested that night. I mean, the police should have come immediately as soon as they heard all these shotgun blasts.
When we come back, what happened on the night of the murders? Why did you feel the need to fire that many times, to exit and reload, as well as to kill your mother? We're back now with How It Really Happened. On the phone from prison, Lyle Menendez. Let's pick it up where we left off.
Were there words between your mother and brother?
Yeah, Mom said something like, "You ruined this family," or something like that. And Lyle said something to Mom.
Do you remember what the subject matter was of what Lyle said to your mother? Did it have anything to do with you?
He said something like, "Are you going to let this happen, or do you want this?"
You believe that your mother has said things, you believe your father has said things that make you feel that this could go very badly for you. You decide not to leave. You're there with your brother. When do you decide we need to get the weapons and we need to go into where they are and shoot?
Immediately after my mother made those comments and closed the doors was, I would say, the most panic moment, and that's when that decision was made.
I ran upstairs to tell my brother that it was happening now and that this was it, and they were gonna kill us.
A large part of me felt that my father was probably not going to use outside help to take care of this. He might feel it safer to do it himself. And again, knowing the man, I totally believed the threats that he was making.
What did you do when you walked into that room with your brother with the two weapons? What did you see when you entered the room?
It was chaotic. It was a dark room, and my father was standing, and there isn't much I remember too carefully through that. I mean, too well through that. It was just a deafening, horrific few moments of my life that come back to me all the time.
There were just glass, and you could hear things breaking, and you could hear the ringing noises from the booms, and there was the smoke from the guns, and it was basically just chaos, and I really didn't know who was firing at who and what was going on. I just was doing firing my gun.
For people's understanding of your state of mind, when you went into that room, did you see your father or your father and mother as in a position to attack you, or were they just sitting there and watching TV?
No, they were certainly not sitting there watching TV. We just had a argument outside the room with my mother, and she had really just walked into the room, and my father had just come into the room. So I know that's a narrative out there. They were watching TV, and that's inaccurate. But the room was pitch dark, and there was a TV on.
So the TV was on. I mean, that's, makes sense that somebody was watching it if it was on, right? But that's neither here nor there. You didn't sense that you were being attacked when you came in the room, but you decided to shoot anyway.
I didn't know what was going to happen in the room. We definitely fired the instant we entered the room, and I think that's part of the reason that the police were saying the crime scene was so chaotic. It was a tremendous amount of shots were fired all over the room, and so it was a horrific experience.
The forensics showed that the weapons had been reloaded. Each, your mother and your father, were shot multiple times, as you know. So you made that decision to keep shooting in there and to shoot your mom.
They're not decisions that are just being made in a chaotic, firing, dark room. You're just in a reactive state at that point.
But they were explained that way.
I could have not told the jury that I reloaded. That certainly left me in a lot of legal jeopardy. But my attorney told me, and it was our state from the beginning, that you are just going to tell everything that happened to you and everything that happened that night as it happened.
Right.
And if it means that you end up doing life in prison because of it, so be it, but you changed nothing. Because the prosecutor had no idea that I reloaded. The first time she ever heard that was when I was on the stand.
So I reloaded.
You reloaded? Is that yes?
Yes.
And what did you do after you reloaded?
I ran around and shot my mom.
I was there to say exactly what happened as it happened, Chris.
And I'm asking you, why did you feel the need to do that? Why did you feel the need, not to tell the truth, but why did you feel the need to fire that many times, to exit and reload, as well as to kill your mother and not just your father?
I think, once you're in a panic, once you're in that place, I think you end up using every shell that you have and firing way more than you need to. I think I would have kept firing until I didn't have anything left to fire. I was just in that place.
All right, we got to take a break right now. When we come back, we have more with Lyle Menendez. Did you think in those months afterwards, when the investigation seemed to go cold, did you think that you guys were going to get away with this? Welcome back to How It Really Happened. I'm Chris Cuomo, and we're talking about the Menendez murders with Lyle Menendez. Now, Lyle, you have that horrific scene. The killings are done. You said earlier, we thought we'd get arrested that night, except that when you called 911, you didn't say, come get us. You told the story of finding your parents killed. What happened from the time after you killed them?
Right. Well, I mean, this was, because it was not planned, there was no plan. There was no alibi in place, not even a small one. We had not worn any gloves or done anything that you would just, basic stuff you would do if you were planning a crime. And we had just, I think it was 12 shotgun blasts in a quiet summer night in Beverly Hills, where the homes, I think the public probably thinks the homes are really separated because they're such expensive homes.
Right, but
they're
not.
Actually, they're just mansions 10 feet apart. So everybody in the radius heard all this and would have obviously called the police and said, oh my God, there's a bunch of shooting going up. Shockingly, nobody did call. So we waited for the police. When they did not show up, we definitely made a selfish decision to not want to we did not want to confess, and I told my brother there's no reason to. For the police, why would we do that? So we went ahead and we tried to form an alibi. I went to a movie theater and tried to get a ticket that would say that we were at the theaters, and I was told that no, they're time stamped and you can't do that. You can't get a ticket for earlier. So that didn't work. So we pretty much were left with just coming back, and at some point, what were we going to do? We had to call 911. My brother was already kind of falling apart, being next to the crime scene, and both of us were getting emotional. So it was not hard to call 911 and be emotional. We did have enough time to realize that there may be fingerprints on the shelves. Let's pick some of them up that we can see if we can pick up all the shelves. And we did that because we hadn't worn gloves. So we felt, okay, we'll get the fingerprints off the shelves. I'm not sure why the detectives initially were saying that that's evidence of premeditation. It seems to be the opposite.
Well, their theory is that if this was about your feelings of being threatened and the emotional toll of abuse, you would have stuck with that after the fact as well. And when the police came, you would have called the police and said, we shot him, here's why, but you didn't. You went with the movie tickets, you picked up the shells, you tried to cover your tracks, and then you told them a different story on the 911 call.
Right. I don't think it's realistic to think that I'm going to tell the Beverly Hills Police Department what happened, and they're going to go, okay, that's good enough for us, and you can go home now. In my mind as a 21-year-old, you shot your parents. I don't care why it happened. The fact that it happened because my dad was a child molester, I'm still going to prison for life, and that's the end of it. So I didn't say anything. Now, what I did tell my brother when they took us down to the police station, I said, look, if you go in there and you end up saying what happened, you need to let me know when you come out, because I'll do the same thing. If you don't say what happened, then, I won't either, and we'll just see what happens. Maybe have a life after this.
Did you think in those months afterwards, when the investigation seemed to go cold, did you think that you guys were going to get away with this? I don't know. My brother was still suicidal from the events that led up to this, and I did not, to tell you the truth. I think that it was going to happen because my brother was going to just talk about it, or maybe some of the sexual abuse that, like I said, there were other people that knew, that once those stories start to surface, the police would turn their focus more toward us. So I didn't really know. What do you make of some of the...
I wish we had been... if you ask me, Chris, it would have been very helpful if they would have just gave us a gun residue test like you would think they would and arrested us right there.
Why do you think they didn't do that test?
What?
Why do you think the police didn't do that residue test? You think it was because they bought your act about the 911 call and this being a murder?
The police detective testified to was that in his 20 years of doing this, he knew the difference between genuine trauma and crying and an act. He was no question in his mind. He knew that he was dealing with two kids that were traumatized, and so he didn't know why. And it later became apparent at trial why.
Whose idea was it?
Eric wasn't traumatized because he killed his parents for money. Eric was traumatized because he was a molested kid, a traumatized kid. He was very affected by Eric and just decided not to put him through that, is what he testified.
Well, and again, they were given a different story by you guys, and you guys explained it as a potential mob hit that it may have been because of the business your father was in, and then they wound up running down that road for a while. I mean, that probably goes a long way towards explaining why they didn't have an immediate focus on you, no?
Well, I mean, I think in family violence cases, you look first to the family members in the home, people who had access, and you work your way out, right? So you would first exclude Eric and I. You wouldn't just obviously believe the story that you were being told as a detective, or you would never solve any crime.
Depends how compelling the people are.
You can't blame. I don't think you should blame Eric for the fact that the detective did not give him the test and should have arrested him right there.
All right.
Eric was just a traumatized kid.
All right,
right? Yes, you can blame us for not confessing right there, but I don't think confessing there was going to happen.
Stay tuned. More of how it really happened. A computer consultant testified that you hired him to search for any references to a will in your father's computer and to erase what he found. Is he lying? Welcome back to How It Really Happened, Murder in Beverly Hills, the aftermath. On the phone from prison in California is Lyle Menendez. Now, Lyle, let's talk about the difference between the two trials. You had mentioned earlier that premeditation was something that you felt was very weak in the case. The main points that the prosecutor made was these guns were bought in advance, they were bought with somebody else's ID, that somebody had been enlisted to search your father's computer to look for a will, and then, of course, you have the recollections and the recordings of the psychologist, Oziel. So taking those one by one, the idea that you bought the guns in advance and used a fake ID, why?
My brother was using that ID as a fake ID to get into, like clubs in those areas or go with his friends, and he used it to buy the guns. So,
I know, but it shows an intent to deceive.
The guns were not purchased. The purchasing of the guns I testified to about at length. It was just to arm ourselves for that weekend. We initially wanted to buy handguns that you could just sort of have on yourself, but that required a 2-week waiting period. And because of the circumstances that I just told you about of what was happening that weekend, you couldn't wait 2 weeks. So we needed something that would be arming us then. We thought about knives. We essentially decided that was not going to work. So we bought the guns. And so I don't know.
How about the man who came forward to say you asked him to search your father's computer for the will?
Yeah, that's not what actually happened in trial that came out. There is no will that can be on a computer that would be valid. The family was looking. We assumed that there was a will that disinherited us because over a year before I had been informed by the executor and my father that we had been removed as beneficiaries in the will. And so there was an assumption that there was a will that we were out of.
Well, a computer consultant testified that you hired him to search for any references to a will in your father's computer and to erase what he found. Is that?
Well, what happened
is he lying?
All my aunts and uncles were looking for a possible will that might be in the home, since they didn't know what attorney might have had a will. And nobody was a computer expert, and we didn't know. It didn't seem like there was. My uncle said it doesn't appear that there's anything on this computer that's a will, but there's a bunch of private files of your mother's. And my concern was, what is in those files about my mother that's going to reveal what maybe was going on in my family that I did not want out, and I didn't want my relatives knowing about in terms of who my father really was. And I just basically said, look, once he determined, the expert, that there was no will on there was nothing that the family could use, but there were these other files that seemed private letters and stuff like that. Could you erase this computer? Because I was afraid that my aunts and uncles would then start going through my mother's personal things and find out things about my father. So I had it erased for that reason. But I was told before the computer expert got there, no will on the computer would be of any validity anyway.
I understand. I was just trying to get the record straight. One other factor, and then I want to get into the difference between the two trials in terms of the abuse evidence. The psychologist, Oziel, that was a damning set of recollections by him about your getting very upset at Eric for having confided in his psychologist about what he had done, threatening his life, and doing that consistently to him, either in jest or seriously. Very damning account from that psychologist. How do you explain it?
That's not accurate either. That's another media account. The psychologist, all Eric did was reveal to him that he had killed his parents and he was responsible. He did not tell him why. I did not threaten him in any way. What I did after the session was go and consult an attorney and say, what do I do about Dr. Oziel, who my brother just confessed to?
So what his colleague Smythe testified to in the pretrial about Smith, what she heard with Oziel, about what you said in that room, she's lying to?
Julian Smith you're talking about his mistress, and she did not testify to that. She said that you could not, it was clear that you could not hear what was in the room. She
did in a pretrial hearing, though.
The circumstances of the room that you could not hear what was in that room.
Right, but she did testify to it in a pretrial hearing, just to keep the record straight. She did testify to it.
Initially, in the pretrial hearing, Dr. Oziel said, "Look, they threatened me, and you're a witness to that." And she initially said, "Oh yeah, I heard that." But
she said more than that, though, Lyle. She said that she heard you make very specific threats.
Possible. She agreed that she did not hear it. And also, I don't think it's an issue that was in dispute. Dr. Oziel himself testified at the trial. Why would he have not said I threatened him if I did? He did not say that.
All right, we got to take a break right now. When we come back, we have more with Lyle Menendez.
I just told him, I don't.
In the first case, the first trial, your testimony was so emotional and compelling, we saw what the outcome was with that hung jury. You didn't testify in the second because... Welcome back to How It Really Happened, Murder in Beverly Hills, The Aftermath. On the phone right now is Lyle Menendez from prison. Here in studio with us is former appeals attorney Cliff Gardner, child abuse defense witness Dr. Stuart Hart, and journalist Robert Rand. The difference between the first trial and the second trial, the ability to put on the extensive evidence of abuse from the first trial that was cut short in the second one. Now, Doctor, you testified in that first trial. This was also something that wasn't as common for you. Abuse was. Why did you believe it?
Why did I believe it?
Yes.
Because we had so much corroborating evidence. Talking to extended family, peers, coaches, and so on. They had so many pieces of corroborating evidence that somebody had seen something. Didn't mean they'd seen it all, but they'd seen enough to give validity to it. But they ended up thinking, this is battered person syndrome.
Well, okay, the clinicians did. The jury, nobody said not guilty. On the conspiracy charge, yes, they did, but that's not what I'm talking about. On the homicide charges. So what do you think it was there in that first trial for the jury?
Let me piggyback on what the doctor's saying. You, at the outset of your question to him, you pointed out that our understanding of battered person syndrome or intimate partner battering is very different today than it was then. Keep in mind that even though this was 20 years ago, 6 of the jurors accepted the imperfect self-defense contention, that there had been abuse and that it made a difference in their culpability level. And this was 20 years ago. The reason that happened is because that jury heard not only the state's evidence, but they heard the defense evidence as well. They heard the full presentation of 31 source witnesses. That was the name given, and what the doctor's referring to are the witnesses that testified about the abuse. That jury was unable to convict of murder, and 6 of them wanted to convict of manslaughter. Compare that to the second jury. Every one of those 31 source witnesses was objected to by the prosecution. The trial court excluded many of them terribly significant witnesses.
How big a deal do you think was perception going into this trial at first and in the second instance? They're spending lots of money, they're living large. How heavy do you think that weighed on the prosecutor's intent to get these guys?
Well, I was there for every day of jury selection, and every single person who came in had heard about the case, knew about the case, but told the judge that they would be able to set aside anything they had previously heard about the case. But the biggest difference between the first trial and the second trial was the defense was not allowed to put on the heart of their case until the penalty phase. And at that point, we heard all of these witnesses that had been the heart of the defense case in Menendez 1. And after the second trial was over, I interviewed all the jurors, and 4 of the jurors told me that if they had heard that defense evidence in the guilt phase, they would not have voted for murder.
Lyle, while I have you on the phone, the decision not to testify in the second case. In the first case, the first trial, your testimony was so emotional and compelling.
And he said that he didn't mean to hurt me. And he loved me.
We saw what the outcome was with that hung jury. You didn't testify in the second because?
I didn't testify in the second because I no longer had my lead attorney, Jill Lansing, on the case. She was quite devastated by the outcome of this case. She felt very strongly about what the truth was in this case. I had been sort of dragged into testifying and talking about what happened to me. I really desperately did not want to do it because of its effect on my family members and my grandmother at that time, my father's mother, who accepted what occurred but did not want to hear it in open court. It took everything I had to testify in that first trial. It was very difficult. When I got the result that we got, which was no result, I told my brother I wasn't doing it again.
So in terms of where you can go from here, there is this law on the books now, California Penal Code 1473.5. It deals with putting on evidence in domestic abuse cases and being able to go back and do that because it wasn't recognized years ago. It's been subsequently extended in terms of what period of crimes it can cover that would cover you now. Are you thinking about trying to get a new trial on the basis of being able to put on this evidence that you were denied in the second case?
We already filed that appeal. I think it's interesting. It ended up in the Ninth Circuit with a very respected judge who ended up running the Ninth Circuit. I think he articulated very well to the state's attorney his feeling that this was a very unfair second trial, that the rules seemed to have been changed mid-course to try to find a way to get a conviction, that it was distasteful. Whether it rose to a legal threshold of reversal was a harder question. But what happened wasn't. To hear that from a Ninth Circuit judge was very validating. I think we've been through the process. I don't know if there's another avenue or not. I haven't consulted an attorney about it.
Well, I got Cliff right here. What do you think? What do you think about this?
The rule you're talking about, you have till 2020 to file something.
Right.
So there is time.
So, Cliff, what do you think?
Sure. Well, 1473.5, which is the statute you're talking about, permits a defendant who's convicted to seek relief. It opens the courthouse doors if 2 criteria are met. First, they have to be convicted prior to 1996. And second, they have to, or at their trial, there has to have been a battered person syndrome or whatever it's called currently. That has to have not been presented at trial, or if it was presented, it has to have been presented in a way that wasn't substantial, according to the statute.
You think they have a chance?
Now, they don't have resources. There's no right in California to a lawyer. There's no right for funds to hire someone with great experience that can offer this, that can look at all the source witnesses. So there's a real practical problem here, impediment to either of the boys seeking relief under 1430, under the statute.
Do you think the story deserves another chapter?
I think it does deserve another chapter. I think what it deserves is the truth needs to come out about this story. For 27 years, the mainstream media coverage of this story has had it wrong. There is a different story, what really happened here.
Well, I want to thank all of you for taking this opportunity to take us through the psychology, the legality of it. Lyle, Menendez as well, thank you for taking the opportunity to tell your side of this story.
Thank you, Mr. Cuomo.
All right. So our thanks to Robert, Cliff, and Dr. Hart as well. I appreciate you all being here with us. And thanks to you for watching. Have a good night.